someone sends me a DM and is talking about things that we're talking about internally, like, hey, I see you work at Optimism. Like, how are you all thinking about interoperability? Like, that's a huge light bulb for me.
Hi, everyone. It's only the second episode, but I'm kind of liking this intro part. So I'm very excited for this conversation. We're going to be talking about all things getting a job in crypto, Web3. And I think this episode is also very timely because it feels like the demand for talent in crypto is really high right now. And so to talk about this topic, we have two of the best people to talk about this, I feel like, because they've been actively recruiting talent to Web3 for quite a while. And we have Harper and Alec. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on. Okay, so before we get started, why don't I ask you guys both for a short intro and what you're doing right now? And maybe we can kick it off with Harper yourself. Do you want to kind of get us started?
Happy to. Thanks for having us. So I work at OP Labs. I've been contributing to the Optimism Collective for a little over 2 years. And I spend the vast majority of my time building our engineering, security, product, and design teams.
Awesome. Hey guys, I'm Alec.eth. Right now I'm building Interested.fyi, which is like an aggregated job board mixed in with some referrals and a bunch of other really good stuff like bounties. Previously was doing a recruiting collective called People Work. And then before that was actually recruiting at Consensus Mesh, leading people and talent over there. And prior to that was doing a lot of high frequency trading recruiting when I was in Chicago. So kind of seen all the eras of computing, each of those. So really excited to be here and bring that perspective.
Awesome. Okay. So first question is the big ominous one. And that's just, I am someone who wants to get into crypto. I want to figure out how to get in. Where do I go? What do I do? Like, what is the best first step for someone who wants to get into crypto? What do they do?
Yeah, I can kick it off here really fast. So I think like the best spot, and like we're a very network-based community. So like going to your network and like even asking the person who got you introduced to crypto to be like, hey, like, because we all have that Sherpa, right, who like kind of introduced us to the thing and like the aha moment. So just pulling on the thread, kind of asking like, why is this interesting to you? What is more interesting? What other, kind of threads can I pull on? And then like a little bit of like a bias answer, kind of go back to, Interested.fyi. Like a lot of what we're doing is having, like at face value, like an aggregated job board with, people that we really respect and think that are doing, good builds and whatnot. So, kind of tying that together with the network. Obviously you can go and just, express your interest and raise your hand and say, I'm interested in going ahead and getting in touch with people at this company. But on the other side, if maybe you're not the best fit, you can actually share your referral link and jobs to your network essentially to go ahead and like get that signal, view essentially. So I think again, like kind of tying that, network answer, just like really, who do you know? Like what's your people plan? Who are you reaching out to? What's important to you? What's important to these people? And really trying to tie it all together. Because I think interest and passion really do tie a lot of people together. So
I think I saw Mike Demerai from Rainbow say something like Ethereum is like a shepherded ecosystem, right? There's always like you have your shepherd and they had their shepherd, and maybe we shepherd one to many a little bit, but there definitely is this like I had stupid questions and I needed someone that I really could trust to ask those questions because they're so dumb and there's so much money on the line. So definitely like the shepherding. There's the aha moment where there's a lot of technical jargon and a big decentralized space of information, and every once in a while you find the little gem that kind of opens everything up and gives you the aha moment. So I doubled down on both of those things. And then another thing you said there was like the standardization across the ecosystem and the composability is you can learn a bunch of skills in one area and they kind of apply across, or like there's this deep knowledge that happens, but that deep knowledge applies across. And if we have like this standard, here is my, Web3 portfolio, and I know how to build all these things, it does transfer across to a lot. Anything else there, Harper, or would you agree with most of those things? Is there more to add there? What would you follow up with?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree. I would say if you're interested in starting to understand the space, don't rush it. I think the space is really big and there's a lot to understand, and it's expanding every day. And I think just starting to understand sort of like what the edges are. If you're interested in finance, there's an obvious corollary with DeFi, but there's a lot of really interesting other work happening that's maybe a little bit harder to find. So give yourself a little time. And it's a social space. I think Alex said it's a network-driven space, like Twitter, Farcaster, YouTube, podcast, whatever it is, whatever channel works for you. I think try to build it into your natural flow, and spend some time understanding it, get the lay of the land, and then start to understand what kind of problems you're interested in solving. And then I think going from there is like a really organic way. And I think that's key because, it's a choppy space and there's a lot of ups and downs. And if you can't find something that you're really genuinely and intrinsically motivated about, it's can be hard to stick around.
So I do kind of want to ask a bit like a follow-up question to these, especially because I come from the very traditional tech world where most of the recruiting or like finding a jobs was through LinkedIn. And then when I got into crypto, I was like, oh, I can get a job from Twitter. That's really interesting, or like tapping into my network. So like the channels, like I know, Alec, you mentioned interested.fyi, a place to like find jobs, or like even Farcaster, like the jobs channel, or like Twitter as well. Would you say like LinkedIn is still used, or are these like, more like, should people like go ahead on Discord or like through GitHub issues, like find more jobs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I use LinkedIn for some roles. There are roles where LinkedIn makes a lot of sense. And it's we're all sort of locked into it because it's got this crazy network effect. But I actually love LinkedIn personally. I find it fascinating and enjoyable social network. But I also recognize that a lot of really strong talent, particularly in this space, is not on LinkedIn. So it's not I don't use it as like a primary source necessarily. For most roles, it's really a secondary source. And I end up spending a lot more time on social, a lot more time on GitHub and Farcaster, Twitter, things that tend to have a little bit more crypto native folks. But I would say LinkedIn is certainly not a bad place to be. And in general, I think you want to be as many places as you can, telling your story in a way that's like concise and easy for people to understand.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, I think LinkedIn's like the good one pager essentially to like maintain. So like people can go back to it. Like people are gonna want to search you in some way prior. If you have an anon account, like obviously it gets a little tougher to cross-reference kind of, who you are and what you've done. But I do think that like a lot of people are establishing the conversation on LinkedIn in different ways. Especially like, maybe teams like the Optimism side, as they're starting to go into their more enterprise phase as well. Like, this is me kind of filling in some blanks, so put my foot in my mouth. But I think there's like a certain tier of teams like that are starting to think that level. And then some other teams are like starting to think earlier on, maybe scrappier, more degen, are finding people just like interested through socials, kind of like Harper's mentioning, other stuff. So I think there's definitely a time and place, but to Harper's point, like definitely boost your stuff all over the place. Because someone, you never know who's gonna be on LinkedIn at one day versus Twitter the other, and where you stay in the feed. So yeah, I definitely agree with
that. Okay, yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. Like kind of showcase your work on all the different platforms, and then you might get like input or reach out or find something there. I really like that idea. So now moving on. So let's say like I found a job that I really like. I think one of the most questions like also like we get is, and coming from BuidlGuidl, where a lot of developers are entering and kind of like building out their portfolio, how can I stand out in like an application? Like what are the things like people, hiring managers are looking for, or teams like need? Is it like having open source contributions, creating content beforehand, knowledge of crypto? Kind of just want to see like, what are people looking for when they want to hire a person to a Web3 company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are two sort of primary parts to it. One is like, what do you do to get recognized? And the second is like, how do you tell your own story? How do you explain what it is that you've done? And I think on like the things to do side of the question, crypto is a crazy wild space, and you can sort of do whatever you want, you know, like you can DM the founders of a project, you can do something really, you know, you could go build stuff on Scaffold ETH, you know, or go through BuidlGuidl. Like you can do more well-established things, or you can like create your own universe. And I think both are valuable. But I think like understanding, getting excited about a project, starting to understand the problem space that they're operating within, and then like going deep is really the best way you can do it. If someone sends me a DM and is talking about things that we're talking about internally, you know, like, hey, I see you work at Optimism. Like, how are you all thinking about interoperability? Like, that's a huge light bulb for me, and a huge signal that the person's really paying attention. And then I think in terms of the second portion of the question, which is how do you sort of tell your own story? It's like, make it as simple as you can, pretend you don't know anything about yourself, and then like build a website or write a resume or whatever it is that works for you, whatever feels authentic, and put that in front of the people that are trying to make decisions about how to build these teams at these projects.
Yeah, and just to plus one on like really heavy on the first part of Harper's answer, like I think crypto is the loneliest space to build in, right? Like your parents don't get it, your friends probably don't get it, most people probably don't get it. I mean, honestly, sometimes at times I don't get what I'm doing. So I think like when you send that DM to the founder, to someone like Harper, who's, you know, a decision maker and hirer, you know, it's just really like, hey, like I get you. Because people, again, are like fighting that most people don't get them all day, whether it's like in the pitch that they're explaining to VCs, again, to their parents or whoever, right? So I think just like level setting and say, hey, like, I get what you're working on. I'm interested. How do I help? Right. And like it, instead of saying like, what can you do for me in these I statements, right? Like, how can I help? Right. And maybe make it very much so about them. And then the other side of like showcasing, you know, I think that there's a lot of like, how do you say, like de-risking in how people want to hire. So like if teams are maybe only going to get to like 10 to 15, just because there's these, you know, these pretty lean teams, you know, mostly. You know, kind of this one rubric that I really like looking at kind of breaks things down by like the known candidate. So it's like someone who's known around the block, down the street, you know, the proven experience. So I've done, you know, this kind of stuff, like in this discipline. There's the proven industry, right? That you're coming from. There's like the proven problem set that like I've worked on, and like the proven scale. And I think that, you know, those couple buckets, if you can relate part of your story to that, that's really great. Like, you know, just kind of like level setting and giving an example here because it's kind of intangible. You know, like if you worked on like streaming at Netflix, right? Like you probably understand like, you know, how to maybe keep a blockchain up, or, you know, how to like make optimized protocol. Like, so I think those things are pretty translatable, and that could be like that scale, the problem set in certain degrees, and the experience. So, you know, maybe that's like 3 of the 4 categories just to kind of holistically round out that answer. And kind of showing that off on the website, or, you know, different ways where people are, you know, having that conversation so they can really closely reference it instead of like go out of their way and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's some of the stuff I'm thinking about.
So I fully agree. Like, I really like the part about showcasing your work and like proven experience of what you've done. Because like, for example, in the traditional tech world, I think it's more about like your degree or like kind of more stuff on your CV rather than like actual, you know, building out a website. I mean, that obviously is important too, like to have those kind of projects in your portfolio. But I feel like it was more about like where you went to school, like your GPA, MBA, etc. So those were like more valuable. And I actually like, I sometimes put out this tweet in different variations that I feel like the best way to get a job in like Web3 or crypto is to actually do that job. And I sometimes get like not so nice comments on it. Like people are like, oh, like, how do I do it? Like before getting a job, to say it in the best possible way. Do you think that's a fair statement to say, like to, you know, to kind of go ahead and like, since most of the stuff is already open source, like you can go ahead and build your own thing and then apply for a job? Because when you just apply and you have nothing to reference, like no proof of the experience, it just kind of falls through, in my opinion. But what would you say to this? Like, do you think I'm putting out something controversial, which I don't think is the case, but
I think you're right, Etta. The best way to get the job is to do the job. And we've hired folks that have basically come to us and said, you have a need for this, and I'm already doing this, and what do you think? You know, like, However, that's not necessary. You can get a job without doing that. So I think the pushback to that statement is that it's free work and it takes time and requires some certain level of, or means or flexibility. And I get that. And I think it's fair to think about it in a more nuanced way. But I would agree that it is like probably the single strongest channel would be to just go and do the work and then prove that you can do it. So if you have the means and time to do so, would highly, highly recommend doing it, but also worth acknowledging that it's not necessary.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think there's this like intern meme that goes around like crypto Twitter and around, kind of the crypto industry. Like, I think we all started as an intern to some degree. Like, I've been involved in crypto since like 2017 and was trying to get like a full-time role probably, up until like 2020 before I like ended up full-time over at Consensus Mesh. And I think like because we're such a young, unproven, like nascent industry, like either you have to really come out early and do like one of those projects like a lot of these founders have done to get that early attention, or like go ahead and like, honestly come from a pretty high pedigree to like instantly get that like check mark of reputation. That said, like there's so many ways, right? Like you can start an agency with your friends and do stuff, to the, for the communities you like, or, come to people like Harper and say, hey, I'm doing this, like, do you got a spot for me right now? Or like, or in the future, right? And again, it's like keeping in touch and making sure that like you're following up and keeping your work visible. So I do think that there's some of the like pedigree, for lack of a better term, blocker that some people hit. But to kind of like combat that as well, like there's, and I hate to use the word, but like a level of nepotism that ends up getting a lot of these people these jobs. And nepotism is the right word, but more connection, right? And I think that like you'd be very surprised at the stats of like internal referrals or just general referrals. So again, just keeping that network strong, building with people who you want to, either build with or just like in places that you want to kind of further out. It will take a while. I will be honest, and you will have to boost and elevate your work in different ways than probably other people. So, but yeah, I agree with a lot of that.
Yeah, the space still is very small and your connections go so far. You can have a conversation at a hackathon that ends up being $1 million conversation and you didn't even expect that to happen. But then over the next 10 years of your life, it's changed so much because of that. You met just the right person. I want to double down on the free work thing. It's, of course, like that's why, like when an influencer sees Edda tweet something like that, they're like, oh, I'm not going to work for free. But it's like in this place where everything is free and available for anyone, it's permissionlessly composable. Like issues are in GitHubs. And they're also incentivized, like there's bounties to go do these issues and you can get paid in the native currency. Like all of those things coming together makes it it makes your tweet so accurate, Edda. So even if you get pushback on that, like I remember seeing that tweet and being like, that's one of my favorite things to think about in the space, is because we have all these open issues, we have everything, we all have so many problems trying to build all these things, that if someone can come in and solve those problems for us, they're gonna immediately like go to the top of my list in terms of someone I want to be giving a grant to, or I want to be funding in a way. So just like triple clicking down on that. Like don't let the influencers nag on you too hard for that. They don't work as hard as you, and that's the difference. You just got to work hard and do those things, and that's a big piece. So I want to kind of just like think about things from the point of view of how the Build Guild is thinking about doing onboarding, shilling the Build Guild here. We're thinking devs are coming into this space and there's the Dunning-Kruger effect where you start learning and then all of a sudden you feel like you know everything about the space and you can go build anything. And then there's kind of like that long journey down that where you have to keep learning and realize there's so much more to learn. And so what Build Guild is doing is trying to get people kind of down into the valley as fast as we can, giving them enough information where they don't just learn how to build, but they learn why we're building it and what kinds of things you would use a blockchain for. And then we try to get them basically to post those builds up and to post their history up. So you have this nice composable LinkedIn like profile that shows all your builds. You know, I can build a DEX, I can build a multi-sig, I can build a token vendor. So it's not just like you've learned how to write Solidity, yes, but we want you to be able to prove to the ecosystem that you get it. And I think that that's like and also we want you to hold ETH, right? We want to stream you some ETH, or we want to give you like an early scholarship so you buy an ENS. And I think those two things are like, give them the why, and give them some ETH to hold, and then give them a platform where they can show off their work. There's still so much more to do, but like that's kind of how we're thinking about it from the point of view of the Build Guild. And I just like to hit you guys with that long spew of things and see if it sparks any thoughts or maybe next steps or things Build Guild could be doing differently.
Yeah, so I think like it's always good to like get like some of these like get things into people's hands, right? Like the ENSs, to make sure that they start to get these certain things so they can start showing their identity across different platforms. You know, whether that's, you know, changing your default username from like whatever on Farcaster to an at like .eth, right? And I think that's like a really powerful way to like have a stickier onboarding. And then like, again, like Sherpaing people through like kind of those first couple things that might like resonate with like challenges, you know, various teams I'm working with, or like places like OP. Because a lot of these, how do you say this best way? A lot of these problems that people are solving in like these infra and these technologies aren't very different from each other, right? And are very different actually from traditional things in Web 2 and in different ways, you know, whatever. So I think that there's like that good aha moment, you know, when you're even thinking about like, oh, a DEX swap, and it's like, maybe this is an ecom swap in Web 2, and this is a new thing you can build. So I think like having those like really easy to latch on and translatable things, and also that place to showcase is absolutely huge. And all these other
That
things
point
too.
about not Web 2 to Web 3 is like we should definitely double click on that too. Like Web 3 is not mutually exclusive of Web 1 and Web 2, right? It's kind of like the best parts, hopefully, of Web 1 and Web 2, you know, packaged up in Web 3 where people can own it themselves. And so the hiring process, we were talking about streaming and Netflix, right? Or you're like, you know, hella good DevOps, right? All of that knowledge is still going to translate. I'm running a node here, and it takes so much damn DevOps knowledge to keep this thing going, right? So like a lot of your skills are going to translate too, and don't be afraid to like kind of show those things off.
And just to like really kind of lean into that too, like I saw the best meme the other day where it's like, people don't know that shared sequencers are just like Kafka messaging, right? And it's just like, you know, stuff like that is like, when you hear things like that, you're like, oh, okay, like that is, I have done that, so maybe I can build the shared sequencer. And it's a very tough challenge, by the way. But like, you know, I think just getting those one-to-one kind of comparisons are really helpful for people who aren't day-to-day familiar with, or who just love technology and want to use it in different ways.
Yeah, I agree with what y'all have said. And I think Austin, you know, like giving people ETH, it's like a little thing. And I think Alex said, you know, like changing your name to a .8. If I'm reviewing a resume and I see someone's ENS, or I see a website with a .xyz, like crypto is first and foremost a social movement with a, you know, meaningful technical underpinnings, like, but it's a social thing. And we've talked a lot about that. You need to be like a citizen of the space, and the more you engage with the space, the better. Like get an ENS, have some ETH, you know, buy some meme coins, get hacked. Like all of these things teach you something. And those things are important, and they're not super tangible. But when I talk to someone and they, you know, they're, you know, like, yeah, I lost a bunch of money in Olympus Down. I'm like, yeah, me too. You know, like it's a shared experience. And those things are really valuable and help you better understand the space at like the nitty gritty level. You know, like going through a boot camp and working for 10 years at AWS and then saying like, yeah, you know, I totally understand Web3 is very different than, you know, messing around on chain all the time. And I think there's a big push right now for people to like, you know, be wacky on chain and have fun on chain and all this stuff. And like, it's a little bit memey, but it's also really real. And if you're using this stuff, you're going to better understand this stuff. You're going to like really start to, you know, establish a presence in the space and an identity. And that's really meaningful. And our job as people that are hiring are to like trying to understand who these people are and why they might be valuable to an organization. And it all ties back to the identity. And if you don't have like your on-chain identity sort of like built up in the way you do your Web2 identity, for lack of a better word, hop to it. It's a great way to start to engage, and definitely if you're looking for a job, I'd say it's a really good hack for that.
And just to extrapolate really fast, like, because I love sharing the story, like I attribute a lot of like my ease, not ease, but like my me ending up at Consensus Mesh to just ripping like DeFi like on chain essentially. It was right when Zapper came out, or like it was Zapper and like DeFi Summer and DeFi Dad. Shout out DeFi Dad, thank you so much. But essentially it was just like going through everything, because I'm not technical and I couldn't do things at the contract level, and just messing around with stuff on Zapper, adding liquidity, and then it boosting my degen score to an ungodly level. And that's actually what I put on like in my like header under my name, like with my summary, like, my score for degen score, my upshot, and I don't think they have this feature anymore, but like GMI, score where like, tells me how risky of an NFT minter or whatever I was. So I think those things go a really long way. And like even just like linking again, like, your NFT collection, because like people want to see what you're interested in and want to collect. So just kind of like underlining some of those on-chain type things that, I know I look for, and I'm sure Harper does too, as we're clicking through the resume stack.
I think those are super important, like always to start with the tools and to have like a bit of understanding, like not to be an expert, right? Like we all went through hacks. And it doesn't matter if you're technical or not technical, but to have like an ENS name, to kind of have interacted with like wallets, maybe like your, have some NFTs. Like I'm not saying to buy like a CryptoPunk or anything, but just to basically like have an idea of how everything works is super important. And I think it's really hard to like get a job, or like even if you get it, maybe you won't be that much into it. Because as you mentioned, Harper, much better than I can say, like it's more like a social movement as well. So it's really like important to have that culture fit. So yeah, I fully agree. Like to even before, like to start contributing, like to first of all understand what this whole thing is, and do you kind of like it? Like, is this interesting to you? Like, do you like having like an online identity this way, or so that was kind of obviously how I started. Most people start by losing some money too, which is kind of funny. But okay, so I want to ask another question, and I want to address it to Harper, because Optimism is one of the like teams which have been around for quite a long time and like more established, like building a lot of different things. So I'm curious how like I know you're hiring right now as well, but how big is the team? Like how have you been building the team out for like the past, I think, 2 to 3 years? Just kind of curious, since it's like a more established team, like great reputation, like great builders, but how is the team structure? Are you hiring, and what roles are you hiring for?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. So I guess brief background, what's now called OP Labs used to be called Optimism. Prior to that was called the Plasma Group, which was a small research organization, a bunch of people working on very early days Ethereum scaling stuff. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've been there for a little over 2 years. When I joined, we were right around 20 people. We are about to hit 60 at OP Labs. We've split into 2 organizations. We've got a little over 30 people at the Optimism Foundation, and then we've got a bunch of core development teams that are contributing, and a bunch of people that have basically decided that they're going to work full-time in this ecosystem. So in terms of like the 2 core organizations, it's OP Labs and the foundation, and then outside of that, we've got a bunch of other teams contributing. In terms of how we think about growth, Web2 has gotten some things right, and I think in large part they do a lot of good things when it comes to hiring. I see a lot of crypto companies hiring a little bit all over the place, because they see someone smart and they want them on the team. And I don't think that's the wrong approach, especially when you're small. But we're at a point now where we hire to fill business needs. So we're pretty strict about that. We find a problem that needs solving. We build out a profile of the kind of person that can solve that problem. And then we post a job, and we go and we start to find people. So it's a pretty traditional approach, actually, in that sense. And sorry, I may have forgotten what else you were curious about. I guess, how do we think about growth? Like, we never want to go into like a hyper growth mode. I think a lot of organizations in this space in particular have done that, and then have followed it up by, large scale layoffs. And that's something we don't plan to do either hyper growth or large layoffs. So growing kind of slowly and steadily, thinking a lot about scaling our culture alongside the size of the team is really important. Again, it's a social space. It's a culture-driven space. We want to make sure that we're building a team of people that define success in the same ways that we have since the outset. And of course, it's going to change a little bit, but that's really important to us. Is there anything I'm forgetting in there, Etta?
That's a super important point, right? Like to not hyper growth, because I feel like most companies did do that. And I like following Optimism, I didn't see anything happening there. So that was like really important to make sure that you're hiring for the right roles. But so just kind of to also add, like, are you hiring right now? And where can like people find the roles?
Yeah. I'm supposed to talk about that, of course.
Got to show.
Yes. Yeah. We are hiring. We're hiring. Come work with us. Jobs.optimism.io. Go there. Yeah, we're hiring a bunch. We've actually built our recruiting team quite a bit recently. Again, it's never going to be overwhelming, but yeah, as I mentioned, I'm focused primarily on engineering hiring. So we're hiring protocol engineers and security engineers and engineering managers. Those are kind of my primary focuses at the moment. But we've also got jobs open. A social manager. We're actually looking for a contract content strategist right now. If anybody wants to kind of be half in, half out for the next few months, we're looking for some support there. But again, jobs.optimism.io has all of our open roles, and it also has a bunch of open roles for organizations in our ecosystem, so Base and Agora, and I think there's a couple other folks or organizations that are on there as well. But yeah, we're going to be hiring probably forever, and probably we'll have at least 10 open roles for as long as I can imagine, and right now I think we've got quite a bit more than that, but yeah, go check it out. And you can sign up for job alerts if you don't see a role you like, and you'll get an email every time a new role pops up. And I think there are a lot of people that have done that. We have a couple, like several hundred people on that list. And when we post a job that makes sense for them, I see their application come in and I'm familiar with them, or they've reached out in the past. And that's like a really good way is to apply early and kind of get in the sort of universe that exists. And if you've been around, I'll recognize you, and we'll probably chat.
The half in, half out thing is actually more common than I think we talk about. Like, there's a lot of nights and weekends folks, and there's a lot of people that are like nights and weekends through the bear market, even worse, right? There's a lot of people that I know of that are nights and weekends folks that are doing speedrun Ethereum on the weekends, and then their normal job, or even speedrun Ethereum at night, and then we're sending them a little bit of ETH, and we're kind of flirting and dancing. But it takes a lot to have someone who has an established job with health insurance, and they're nice and comfy to jump off and do the Web3 thing. And especially when the price goes from way up here to way down here every few years, and it's really hard to deal with. But so this demand, though, there was something really interesting during, I did a talk with Maria Shin from Electric Coin Capital, and we were looking at numbers, and they, they crawl tons of GitHub repos, and they're looking at numbers, and this kind of like sad realization came about that like newbies are going to flock in when the price is up. Like, basically you can look at the price, and the amount of noobs coming in is basically like directly correlated to the price, right? So when the price goes way up, we get a whole flood of noobs that come in. And then there's kind of like this learning here that the more established devs stick around. We see devs that have been in the space for a couple of years stay in the space almost nice, and I mean they hardly drop off. There's like little dips for Christmas, basically. And so there's this like aha moment of shit, like if we do a really good job of taking someone from noob to experienced, then they're going to stick around. If we can find like a portal that takes them from noob to experienced in 3 weeks, maybe we can capture all of those noobs when they land, and figuring out how to do that correctly. So I think that like my question here after a long rant, maybe for you, Alec, is how are you thinking about handling the rushes of people as they come in and out on interested.fyi, and like how do you handle a wave of people both, and then like maybe the quiet times too?
Yeah, totally. So even before I get to interested, like when I was over at Consensus Mesh, like was helping out the bootcamp over there a little bit, and like there are like three direct audiences we saw, right? It's like the people who like, you know, are coming from zero coding experience, wanting to get their hands dirty. Maybe someone from a company is getting sponsored to go ahead and go through that program to sharpen up their skill set, or just someone, again, like who wants to do it async, like, you know, like at their own pace, just, you know, bolster some of their existing knowledge or what have you, or just do something in a cohort experience. I think that those are like, maybe from the developer standpoint, some of those like audiences you're kind of talking about, like from, you know, those transient audiences. And then from like an interested, you know, and how we're starting to think about it, I think like that's really good for us, like the waves right now, because we're still like probably about 4.5 weeks old and still building some stuff to make the experience really great. You know, what we've seen particularly, and we're hooked into Farcaster on jobs as well, you know, when there's an uptick in even like social interests from on Farcaster. And I think, again, that's why, just from like a motivation perspective, why we're building out on that social graph is because, you know, opportunities are really close to conversations, and on social platforms, conversations with opportunity are happening, right? So like if you're in the place where these conversations are happening, you can use that account in other ways. It's really nice. So as we're starting to think about the rushes, I think it's really just about how do we make, honestly, people like Harper and other teams that like check out some stuff on Interested, like easier for them to go through and more actionable, just so we can get like yeses and nos to those people sooner, so they, I think being in limbo sucks, right, for everyone. And that's, you know, a lot of the job seekers are kind of in that limbo stage, whether, you know, they put an application, don't hear back for a month or like 6 months, and then realize that they're not a fit after they close out the role, you know, because they never, you know, but yeah, I think that's some of the stuff we're thinking about. And also just like how to speed things up and make things more actionable, and, you know, reuse a lot of the effort we're doing at conferences or online or, you know, on these social networks, to make them more productive actions, you know, so they end up, you know, on someone higher in store step or in their portal. So
just kind of like, just to follow that up, it's about, you're thinking like lowering friction, kind of like making a place where people can find, you know, make it a two-sided market, people looking for jobs, people looking for people to work, and just lower the friction as close to a conversation as you can, so someone like Harper can get in and find the right people and have the right conversations with them.
Yeah. So like
once almost crypto Twitter, right? Twitter has been so important to find the people, and now maybe even like Farcaster is becoming the crypto Twitter. But like, people didn't realize how important it was to just go follow people and be paying attention to context early in the day, because that's where everything was happening. Sorry to interrupt there. Go ahead, Alec.
No, yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, like we're making it super easy to one-time set up like your profile. You can reuse it across all of our jobs. We're doing a good aggregate view, so like you can see all of the jobs, all the companies with some bounties as well. So really trying to like make it, again, one sign up. You can do stuff from like Farcaster, our frames, to like that correspond with like our database and other things that go to, you know, hiring managers. So just making it really easy, and like having links where you can share to group chats where it's like shared by Etta, for example. So anyone who clicks on that link, she can get credit for, because really trying to make sure, like, everyone loves talking about the teams that they love. Like, you know, all this stuff's like a religion anyways, right? So like I'm religious about the OP Superchain and some of the teams building on there and some of these other things. So how do we reuse that? So yeah.
I think that was like a great intro, and I kind of have a follow-up question on more kind of understanding what are undersupplied roles. So for example, like, are there roles you've been trying to like recruit for a really long time, and like these kind of talents is like undersupplied in the Web3 job market? Like, do you see like common patterns around there? Maybe like security, or I don't know, just kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, totally. And I'll give my answer, and then I'll kick to Harper after, because I'm sure there's a bunch of different stuff internally as well. But, you know, from a zoomed out perspective, like, I think a lot of teams, and this is more of like a macro, right? Like, I think a lot of teams are trying to figure out what their monetization is, or like what, you know, they're really trying to build, or what their product market fit is. And like with those like kind of three things, even as like kind of things that we're trying to figure out, like, you know, with no monetization, like that puts like DevRels, like that puts DevRels in a really tough spot, because, you know, they don't necessarily know if they're like just trying to acquire like all of the market, or like if they're trying to renew someone's like business on, you know, a need, or, you know, just like, so I think that's like one. There's, salespeople where they're like, what am I selling? Am I selling a product, or am I just selling like the brand of this company, or like what we're trying to do? And then, so I think those are some like the easier to forget, but like the maturity levels that we're starting to approach. But like from an undersupply perspective and like the talent out there, I think that there's like a big drop off in like real computer scientists, if I really have to put it this way, in our industry. And like, I think a lot of that has to do with the comfort that, other industries and bigger companies can offer. But I do think that like, for every one person we can steal from Fang who's remotely interested, right? Like they've worked on some crazy problems that like I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing, and like the maturity level at certain teams are like just the experience and what they've built isn't necessarily there to make those easier things to build or like cut corners due to past experiences. So it's a wide range of answers, but just like some of the general feedback, I think I'm starting to think about.
It's got to be like cracked to developers, and not just like a co-sci developer, but like when I came in as someone who has a co-sci degree and a master's in a mechanical electrical engineering or something, I was very, very unprepared for what I was about to get hit with, because it's not just learning how to program, it's learning, economics, it's learning incentive design, it's learning mechanism design, right? So I would guess that probably the person that people really want is someone who has like a good understanding of all of those things, even like adversarial like programming, and then can like package them together in a product thinking way. Just to double down a little bit, if we think of like a cron job for a Web2 developer, they're thinking, well, I just need to have a server and it needs to check in every night and it needs to, rebalance my portfolio or roll my logs or whatever. But in Web3, you have to realize that you can't just have a service check in, right? If you want to build an on-chain cron job, it is about the rules. This thing can only run once per night, but it's much more about the incentives. If you run this, you will get paid. And by creating a system with correct rules and incentives, you build something that's going to run way longer than any one service that's checking in at night. And a developer has to come in and kind of go, like we're building these like infinite programs that are hard AF, that are harder than any given institution, right? And me as a programmer can deploy one of those very hard things, and not even I can stop it. And all I have to do is have an internet connection to be able to have that like access. So there's something like very different about the skill set that you need to be very effective in this. But I want to just triple down on this and ask Harper, like, what is the unicorn that you are looking for? Like, when you find a unicorn, do you know it? Like, what are they like, and what are you looking for?
That's an interesting question. When you find it, do you know it? I would say yes. Sometimes you leave a call and you're just so energized and you know that this person's going to be a good fit. And I think probably what we're trying to do is find, like, as much as we're looking for a perfect fit for us, we're looking for a perfect fit for that person. It's a very much a two-sided marketplace. So a big part of it is like being excited and understanding the problem. Like we've hired folks that are new to crypto, but are excited about like sort of core tenets to crypto. We have like 4 people on our team, maybe from GitHub. Our first 2 designers are both from GitHub, and they're like, we love open source technology and we care a lot about open source technology. I don't know anything about crypto, but I care about this stuff a lot. And I was like, okay, perfect. This is going to be a good fit. And it was, and it's been great. So what we're looking for is people that are really excited about the vision for crypto that we have, like open internet and permissionless and all the sort of buzzwords that we're familiar with are real things, and we're excited about them. I think at Optimism in particular, we've got the retroactive public goods funding program. If that's something that like really piques someone's interest, that's really high signal for us. But Austin, you made a good point about like incentive and mechanism design. Like if I speak to an engineer that's thinking about those things or reading about those things or familiar with even just sort of like the basics of that space, that's extremely high signal. like we talk a lot here about hiring athletes, like people that are, or you've heard of the idea of like a T-shaped engineer. It's like you've got some deep expertise somewhere. That's probably where we're gonna hire you to help solve some very specific, challenging problem. But this space is nuts, and like no organization is immune to like the choppiness of the macro environment. And so it's likely that you'll have to flex a little bit in some direction or another. So we look for folks that are really, sort of like aligned with our ideals or our vision for the future, people that are, T-shaped or athletic in their approach to work, flexible, like low ego isn't the right way to put it. We actually talk a lot about intellectual openness. Like if you're committed to being right in crypto, like good luck. You're not going to be right most of the time. And so when we talk to someone that's built something and says like, yeah, I started a company and it failed horribly after 18 months. I'm like, sweet. Like this person is self-aware. They're trying to do stuff. They're learning and they're adapting. Those are all really, really high signal things for us. That's a bit of a roundabout answer, but I think those are things that I look for.
This idea of ethos and understanding, wanting decentralization from the beginning, I think is true. But I think that there's also some people that are on a different place in their hierarchy of needs. And I think we have to watch out for that for developers coming in. And it's probably why we see so many noobs flow in when the price goes up. I think there is kind of in the hierarchy of needs of a developer, there is this bottom layer of like, God, I got to get paid so I can pay my rent, like there's a bit of, I don't give a shit about ethos. Like right now, I just need to cut a paycheck so I can go, I could eat and survive. And I think that we have to understand that first and understand that like, I'm not necessarily looking for someone who's like super ethos driven yet. If they're able to hack and build something and I can pay them and we can start building up the feedback loop. Once I get them paid a few times, I get them a grant or something and kind of shift them up that hierarchy of needs a little bit more. Then I'm definitely looking for ethos. I'm looking for where they want to be. Like early in the space, there was this kind of missionary versus mercenary kind of ideal where I think Consensus and Joe tried to hire a lot more missionaries than mercenaries. And at the time, I felt out of myself as kind of a mercenary. Like I was the type of guy that could just like run on his own and build all sorts of things. At the same time, preaching the good word of decentralization and burner wallets. But I think that there is, when we think of ethos, I think we shouldn't like dive straight into like is decentralization the most important thing to you, Sonny? Like first thing, I think it's like, can you hustle and build things? And then if you're hustling and building things, then we start to figure out like where you stand on centralization and some of the other parts of the ethos. But just like kind of playing that into that. Does that spring any thoughts from you guys, or is there something to add to that?
Totally. And I think that's good. I don't know if you meant to be pushback, but I think that's really healthy pushback to some of the things that I was saying. You're right that like we can also be realistic and hire someone that's like a phenomenal DevOps engineer that's really like, sort of gonna question the things that we're doing. And extremely important, we want people that are going to question the things that we're doing. We do not want to hire a bunch of people that believe that decentralization is the most important thing, facing humanity right now. We want people that don't believe in the things that we're doing to challenge us. When I started, I think our 8th employee was our COO and general counsel is this guy named Josh. And the first call I had with him, I started sort of poking like, so the founders are talking about all this crazy stuff, like I was trying to get his opinion. He had like worked in the military and government and whatever. And he was basically like, yeah, I don't believe in a lot of this stuff. And I was like, okay, that's a little nuts. I was like, these are the founders and clearly this is what we're trying to do. He's like, no. He's like, I love that they believe it. But like, maybe you guys have seen that, meme with like the whole building that's all built and the tiny little stick that's holding it up is like, some guy in Nebraska or whatever. And it's like, he was like, I think that what we're trying to do is nuts. But if we can even get like 10% of the way there and just pay people to build open source software in a way that's sustainable, like that's a huge win for me. So you want people that are going to kind of like challenge the existing ethos and help shape it. And I've had tons of really interesting interviews with folks that are like really skeptical of crypto. And that's actually really high signal for me as well. If people have intelligent opinions and criticisms of the things that we're doing that come from a place of like wanting it to work, you think about Left Terrace or other folks on Twitter that are really loud about things that they don't agree with, but they want to see the things win, Bartik and the L2 Beat folks, like they're coming from really good places and they're holding us to really high standards. And that's all really important.
Yeah, and just to extrapolate on that again, like I think a lot of people come into the industry excited about like more altruistic than like super maxi on decentralization. I think the decentralization is a part of that altruism to some degree because there's more autonomy, power, sovereignty to that. But I think like at the end of the day, just to kind of like summarize some of the stuff that I know like in the past when I was internal and also just like as I'm starting to introduce people, just like getting like-minded people into the room together, right? To see if they could jive and like really latch on to stuff for 8 hours, 10 hours, depending on how many hours, a team's working. But I think that's like one of the big things. And typically like they're altruistic because of the same types of things. And like the cause of it is like the decentralization, the excitement from like teams or like people like you, Austin, like doing BuidlGuidl and like these aggregate communities that are like kind of coming organically together, like through just straight effort, essentially, like and just like pure effort. And I think that's inspiring to a lot of people. And then like that's kind of where you find your hub, essentially. And then like those hubs connect to other hubs and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a lot of different answers, I feel like. But
I feel like I have a really good example of this where people are a little bit too ethos heavy. A lot of times at a hackathon, we'll see someone build something that's basically, it's going to use Ethereum like a database. So it's going to have like your name and your email address on chain. And it's also raising money for public goods because they know that's a good thing in the space and they've heard the public goods term and it's almost a little overloaded right now. But that's like, this is a very common hackathon project. Like, I'm going to use it like a database and I'm going to get all these public goods and we're going to raise all this money for all these public goods. And that's like, that is not going anywhere. Like we need to do that. Like this is something that the ecosystem has been working for forever. You guys are talking about like, open source standards, the guy in Nebraska getting funded. We are finally seeing, like we saw Gitcoin do it for a while. We're seeing like Drips Network look at this now with like the funding.json file. Something is coming. This idea of open source incentives powered by this new kind of on-chain layer. It's coming and it's going to happen. It's not going to happen at a at a hackathon with someone using Ethereum in a way that they don't understand yet. And we're over signaling this ethos a little bit, but something underneath there is going to happen where all GitHub repos are going to start having this one.json file in it that has your Ethereum address or your Optimism address, which is the same thing, by the way. And you will then be able to like, parse your dependency graph and find all your downstream accounts. And when you get retro PGF funding, you can split that retro PGF funding out to these other folks. Like something is happening there and it's going to work. But from the other side of a developer first coming into the network, they think that they're going to build that thing. And it's so much harder than you think. But that's just an example of, oh yeah, we see everyone come in and do that and like over signal on public goods. And you really have to think far more adversarial and realize that humans are lazy and there's all this other stuff that happens, the reason why your project's not going to work and why it's going to take years of work to really make something like this stick. And like there's like a whole bunch of Web2 developers that are just allergic to the idea of blockchain because a bunch of NFT bros have already like totally ruined it for us, right? So many different like reasons why it's actually very hard to understand economics and mechanism design and ethos and have context for the space and actually deploy something that works more like a hyperstructure that can get these projects in. I don't really have like I'm just like rambling. Maybe Etta, you might have our closing question so I can stop rambling. Sorry.
No, I think that was great. Like, I definitely agree with a lot of the points, right? Like, it's good to be like an optimist, but also like you need to be kind of more like look at things where they are and not just like, it's not just like everything's not always going up, or you might not always want to agree because that just doesn't work out. I feel like a lot of people usually agree, especially when the prices are going up, and build similar tools. So I definitely think it's important to note that. And also, as you said, right, like there's been a lot of stories in the media, which always like cover blockchains in a really bad way. So that's kind of what we're also trying to do with this conversation, is that it's actually, there's like this really fun, like experimental side where you can actually build stuff with cool people. So that's really good to mention as well. And I want to ask my last question. This is a question from Farcaster, so I'm going to read it. I think we covered like a lot of things, like kind of the basics of this, but I really like this question. It's from Nolan J. And they ask, is there a demand at all for entry-level junior Web3 developers?
I'll jump in there first, I guess. Like, yes and no, right? I guess like the yes is like, yes, there obviously are jobs for that. I would say the no side of it is like, again, like I think I mentioned earlier, but these teams are really lean and mean typically, and a lot of the time that those jobs open up is like when super growth mode happens, which doesn't usually last anyways. But I will say that like I think it's harder to get that first job, similar to if you were to take a boot camp in any other, like in Web2 or other stuff. And typically, I think you find that through like the minor leagues, I like to call it. So that's like some DAO contribution, doing some bounties, maybe a hackathon. Again, like you really have to connect. You have to find your advocates, whether that's by meeting people, just like cohort style, other stuff. But like until you like maybe build that hackathon project that features this, this primitive from a team, right? They're not going to know about you, but also like the community's not going to know about you as well. So I think like the worst part about working in crypto, one, just disclaimer, a lot of us work probably 5 jobs, just to throw it out there, right? Like 5 different part-time jobs. And part of your job is to boost yourself, right? Like you are, if you're working in crypto, you're like kind of your own entrepreneur in its own way. It's like your PR department, your marketing department, your comms department, your all of these things. And again, like this isn't per se like making it easier to find that job for the the newer engineer, but like I do think that there's some level of writing, sharing, just really being open, right? Like and having that openness that Harper was talking about to either get feedback, to to give feedback in ways that are helpful, whether it's the team that has a blind spot as they're growing. So you really have to be that person. And just to kind of cap it off, like one annoying thing I did when I was looking for jobs, granted like it was in recruiting, so it was a little different, right? Like I would actually reach out to the recruiter and say, "Hey, you have a typo in your job description. Like, can I either help you fill that, or either clean that up for you?" Like, and I was just presenting myself as helpful, showing them that they had a need, and that's like just one good way to kind of at least conceptualize it for my story. I think like again, whether it's reaching out to Harper, "Hey, this there's a bug in this front end. Can I help out and squash it?" This Foundry template sucks, and can we do this, that, or the other thing? Whatever it is, just do it. I think that's my big advice. Just do it. And like, it's so cliche, but the more activity you build up, the more you'll get recognized. And again, lean into the open source bounties. Bounty Caster is great. Whether it's like Gitcoin, retroactively looking for, a fundraise, whether that's like building something mission aligned with OPs like retroactive funding. There's a lot of information out there. It's really just like how much effort you put in to find it. I guess is the good way to say it. So
I still think we're circling around the like, stop asking for permission, go do the thing. If you're worried about doing free work, maybe this isn't for you in the first place. Like you should almost enjoy shipping things before any of this discussion at all. Like if you don't enjoy shipping things, you might have a hard time. So yeah, just get in, find the issues, go do them, stop asking for permission. And you almost have to just build a bunch of things to get context. Like there's context, both. You need to get on crypto Twitter and Farcaster and be following what is interesting to people and following your biggest builders. But you also just have to build a bunch of things and see how they fail and see where it's hard and learn, like, I built an app and it's hella slow, so now I need to build an indexer. And if I'm going to have an indexer, I'm going to have to run my own node. And there's all this stuff, this giant tech tree that you have to learn. And it's just about like stop asking for permission to go learn on that tech tree and start knocking out nodes of the tech tree. Anything else? Maybe closing statements from y'all. What have we missed here? What do you want to highlight?
I'll jump in really fast and kind of extrapolate a little bit on like the last point a little bit. I think the best thing you can do is just find people you respect and like figure out why you respect them, and then just follow their lead, right? Like good example is like I saw like two builders that I'm like very like I respect a lot. Wojciech, who's doing a talent platform called Mastery a while ago, and as he was shutting it down, he's like, I'm building on Farcaster next. That's literally what I'm going to do. I'm like, okay, like I really respect you as a builder, and like I'm curious now, so joined Farcaster, and then shortly after, Linda Shee, who's doing Scalar Capital recently, started building a product down there called Boundingcaster, and I was like, this is signal to me, right? So I think like to really back it up, like before you, kind of imprint your signal to your network in different ways, like you want to figure out what signal you appreciate, right? And really find out like, what you think's worth it, or what you think's going to change the world, or so on and so forth. And you'll be wrong about stuff, right? Like I've been wrong on a million things before that example I just gave, but that kind of increased my taste. And I think that like just really exasperates like the where you're spending open source time, what's going to matter. You're just doing this for a prize, this month or this week, your day at a hackathon. Are you trying to like bring forth the full on vision of like OP and the super chain, like, and want to contribute there in a higher, like a longer time. So again, it's just like, you have to develop your signal before you can really, and what you value before you can really start going out there, because otherwise it's very unintentional and you'll just kind of, it's just harder to kind of like get your narrative straight. And I think, everything's about narrative, right? So I think that's kind of my closing words. I don't think we touched on, but yeah.
Harper, closing words?
Yeah, I liked what you said a lot, Austin, about people asking for permission. Like it's an ecosystem, it's a universe, whatever, however you want to think about it. Just like go be a citizen, like go do stuff, leave the house, go outside. You'll learn, you'll meet people, you'll kind of figure out your little zones, your areas that you like spending time in, and why you like spending time there. And just like figure out what it is that motivates you in this space in particular. And if you can't find anything, that's okay. Come back in a few years, like pivot to AI, whatever. But there's a lot to do here, and there's a lot of really interesting problems and a lot of really interesting people. So like go figure out what it is that gets you excited. And then as Austin said, like there are no rules. Like do whatever you want, pretend there are no rules. That's a really good way to stand out when you're looking for a job. Like do something crazy, send someone an unhinged DM, or like build a website that's upside down, like stand out, like might as well, there's like infinite room for creativity in this space. And as all of our jobs get abstracted away by AI, like that's all that's going to matter. It's just going to be idea guys at the end of the day. So, get a head start on it. But yeah, forget about like trying to go in through the front door. Like it works for some people if you've got a really strong resume or whatever, but like think about, back doors and windows and social layer stuff. Like get creative. Don't read blog posts about how to get a job. You can do that stuff too. It's not going to work, but I would encourage.
I have a blog post like that, but it's okay.
Yeah, don't read Etta's blog. No,
it's just like more ideas. Like I don't think it's like an influencer post, just to make it clear. Maybe it is.
I'm talking more about when people get on the interview and at the end they say, they ask me, are there any hesitations you have about my candidacy for the role? I'm like, okay, I know which blog post you read, and no, I'm not going to explain to you why you're not a good fit for this role.
Yeah. And I think also just like be sober about what you're applying for, right? I think that's like another really good thing. I've seen, maybe you started your own company and you're the CTO of it, but that doesn't mean you can be the CTO of a company like Optimism or other things, because it's just not one-to-one with some of the problems you've solved and other stuff. So just because you maybe have a self-appointed title or a title that someone's given you, just be sober about what the job description is asking for and what they're really looking to solve. Because yeah.
Super. And yeah, exactly. Like, by the way, like funnily, we actually met, I know with Harper, like through Twitter DMs as well. Alec, I think as well. I'm not sure it was through like a call DM or like at a conference. But yeah, I think it's like super, like, people are very accessible, which I was really surprised at. You can like send a founder a DM. And just to like, yes, my blog post is again like not really like an influencer blog post. I just want to put it out there.
I'm not talking about you, Etta. I'm talking about the
No,
ones
no,
on
no.
LinkedIn.
You're on trial,
I'm
Etta.
joking.
You're on trial
I'm
now.
joking. I'm just joking. No, but this was a great conversation. I think so many insights. And yes, I think it's like you kind of just go for it. And most people respond to DMs. And if they don't, they also don't. Like you can go to someone else and like build something else. Like for what it's worth, like I was like when I write blog posts, like some of them don't get any views. Like it's like 10 people read it, and 5 of them is probably family. So it's you know, you kind of put a lot of stuff out there and then some things work, and this is the space exactly to do that. But yeah, this was a great conversation. I know we're on time, so I don't want to continue it. There's just a lot of insights to get here, but thank you so much. We'll link to both of your profiles below. I think I can say that now that this is actually a podcast format. But yeah, thank you so much for jamming with us today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. Seriously.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, y'all. It was great to see you.
Awesome. Cheers, all. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.